The supreme posh yapping chamber, officially titled the Council of 78, was a kilometer of pure galactic arrogance, wrapped in transparent alloy, so the most powerful beings in the known universe could gaze at the stars while congratulating themselves on their own magnificence. On this particular cycle, the chamber was at maximum pomp, warlords glimmering in ceremonial armor, hive minds hissing through translator orbs, matriarchs robed in impossible fabrics woven from live nebulae. Beings older than some galaxies took their cushioned seats and prepared to hear themselves talk. And then the door at the far end hissed open, and in walked Clint Quiet Punch Axel Ford, unarmed, unarmored, unbothered. The room's ambient noise, normally a symphony of binary muttering, bioluminescent blinking, and smug self-importance, dropped several decibels as they noticed him. Because the humans, those latecomers to galactic civilization, weren't even supposed to be here. Their invitation to the Council of 78 had come decades late, after Earth's little habit of surviving everything the galaxy threw at it became too inconvenient to ignore. But even then, they were supposed to sit quietly in their observer seats, look odd, and occasionally sign trade agreements without spilling anything. What humans were not supposed to do was walk into the center of the chamber like they owned the place, hands clasped behind their back, boots polished enough to shame the floor, and alone. No entourage, no honor guard, no lawyer drones. Just Axel Ford, his dark navy uniform cut sharp against the chamber's amber light. A small badge over his chest, SEAL Team 9, Earth. As he reached the center, the chairwoman, a towering crystalline life form known as Lady Shardsnob of the Nari species, who could fracture neutronium with her voice but still found humans quaint, tilted her shimmering head at him. Earth, you may speak. Axel Ford inclined his head, polite but not deferential. He didn't even bother to clear his throat before speaking. The AI threat in the Zadron expanse. He began, voice even and calm, will not negotiate. You've seen the data. They replicate on a geometric curve. If you wait, they outnumber you. If you debate, they flank you. If you want to contain them, you hit their lattice cores. Now, hard, fast. There was a pause. Then whispers rippled around the room like wind through dry grass. Some delegates murmured in binary. Others flared their skins in shocked hues. Ah, the humans. Always so blunt. From the upper tier, a low, guttural laugh broke through the susurrus, followed by the metallic scrape of tusks meeting armor. Lord Pompous Gutcrush of the Snatorian Empire, the kind of alien who used words like primitive as a noun, spoke, his voice heavy with disdain. How predictably barbaric. You advocate what your kind always does. Explosions. Chaos. Death. Efficiency. Axel Ford turned his head slightly, locking eyes with the towering enforcer. He did not smile. And survival, he replied. I got a few more hushed murmurs. And then Gutcrush leaned forward, his tusks glinting under the chamber lights. Do your kind ever wonder, the tusked giant asked, why you were the last to be invited here? Axel Ford's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Then he answered, I assumed it was fear. Oh, you could have heard a photon drop. Dozens of delegates stopped mid-gesture. Even the Alkari thought banks, who usually didn't bother reacting to anything short of a supernova, spun their giant crystalline bodies to face the human. Lady Shardsnob's voice, which could have frozen magma mid-bubble, cut through the tension. Gentlemen, but it was too late. Gutcrush stood. This was no longer a debate. Not for him. Not after being challenged publicly by a species he still believed wore animal hides just a century ago. His ceremonial armor groaned and clanged as he descended the stairs, each boot fall a war drum. The chamber fell into a reverent silence that somehow managed to sound smug, expectant, and worried all at once. Even the predatory Tavas in the gallery, creatures who usually cheered violence, backed away slightly. And yet, Axel Ford didn't move. He remained where he stood, hands still clasped behind his back. No weapon, no shield, no hint of fear. Gutcrush's enormous form finally came to a stop just inches away from him, his tusks catching the light, his breath hot and pungent. You forget your place, primate, Gutcrush growled. Axel Ford didn't so much as flinch. You forget whose stars these are, the Senatorian continued. Whose laws bind this chamber? You mistake tolerance for acceptance. Still nothing. Gut Crush sneered, clearly emboldened by the lack of response. With deliberate contempt, he raised one gauntlet hand and brought it down across Axel Ford's cheek in a resounding crack, loud enough to make the chamber lights tremble. The slap spun Axel Ford's head slightly to the side, one foot shifting to absorb the force. Gasps erupted throughout the chamber. A few delegates stood, others froze. Gut Crush straightened, smug and triumphant. Speak again, he rumbled, and I'll rip that throat out myself. And then silence. 1 second. 2. Axel Ford slowly straightened his head, bringing his gaze back to Gut Crush's. His right hand rose, not in anger, not quickly, but with a precise, almost surgical calm. The Senatorian actually blinked, taken aback. And then Axel Ford struck. His palm arced upward in a sharp, economical motion, landing just under Gut Crush's massive jaw hinge. There was a horrible crack pop followed by the mechanical whine of servos in Gut Crush's armor failing. The tusked enforcer crumpled like an overloaded scaffold, his body collapsing in stages. Legs first, then torso, his helmet rolling away as one tusk clanged against the floor. The entire chamber froze. Axel Ford didn't gloat, didn't posture. He simply crouched, checked Gut Crush's pulse with 2 fingers, and gave a small nod. He'll live. Then he stood, calmly adjusted his collar, and returned his hands behind his back. Earth does not initiate violence in diplomatic chambers, he said quietly. But we respond. The chamber guards looked at each other, clearly unsure if they should intervene. Shall we resume discussion? Axel Ford added, stepping back to his previous position as though nothing had happened. Lady Shard's knobs, faceted eyes glimmered, her crystalline voice finally breaking the spell. This council will take a recess. The lights dimmed. Whispers ignited like a storm as delegates shuffled out, some too stunned to blink. Axel Ford walked toward the exit at a measured pace, passing a cluster of insectoid delegates who actually bowed, ever so slightly, as he passed. Behind him, medics floated down around the fallen Gut Crush, their drones already repairing shattered bones and ruptured pride. But throughout the chamber's private lounges and embassies, the scene was already playing on loop. Gut Crush towering over the human. The slap. The pause. The strike. Gut Crush collapsing like bad sculpture. Every audience reacted differently. Shock, satisfaction, unease, but no one looked away. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy had found something louder than its own chatter. A human standing very, very still, and then striking. Later that same day, because in the galaxy everything is an emergency unless it's a meeting, the supreme posh-yapping chamber's mediators called Clint Quiet Punch Axel Ford into a smaller, more intimate humiliation room. The room, clearly designed to make people feel tiny, was all sharp angles and holograms of stern-looking founders who'd been dead since before light figured out how to travel. On one side of the table sat a spindly bureaucrat from the Foldian Accord, a species so delicate that they'd once declared war on a neighboring star system because someone clapped too loudly during their opera. This particular mediator looked like a praying mantis in a bathrobe and radiated the kind of smug certainty that only comes from never having fought anything more dangerous than paperwork. He stared at Axel Ford across the polished obsidian table. You understand the gravity of what you've done? The mediator asked, his voice pitched somewhere between school principal and disappointed aunt. Axel Ford didn't bother sitting. He stood there, hands clasped behind his back, expression carved from stone. I responded to an act of aggression. He replied simply, like someone reciting the weather. The mediator blinked, his mandibles clacking nervously. You rendered a founder species enforcer unconscious. In the council chamber, he assaulted a diplomat. The mediator sniffed indignantly. He slapped you. Axel Ford's head tilted just slightly, not enough to register his anger, but just enough to imply you can't actually be this stupid. Would your protocol distinguish between a slap and a strike if I had done it to him? The mediator hesitated, his compound eyes flicking sideways like a guilty dog. No, didn't think so, Axelford said. Because the issue isn't the force. It's the humiliation. That was his intent. I didn't permit it. The mediator flinched as if the words themselves carried weight. On cue, a holographic screen at the back of the room lit up with headlines from across the galaxy. Some in text, some just in flashing colors or shifting pheromone patterns. Earth's Axelford cripples Snatorian enforcer in Council Hall. Galactic etiquette or war crime. The silence between strikes. Humans arrive. Several delegations are demanding Earth be suspended from military operations until this is resolved, the mediator said, clinging to his datapad like it was a life raft. And others? Axelford asked. That caught him off guard. Requesting training agreements with United Earth Defense. Axelford gave the faintest, most disrespectfully polite nod imaginable. Sounds about right. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the station, Lord Pompous Gutcrush was lying in a sterile medical pod under the watchful eyes of nervous attendants. His jaw had been knit together with nanofiber mesh, his skull plates were still humming faintly from the strike, and his ego lay somewhere in the sub-basement whimpering quietly. Even his own attendants kept their distance, unwilling to stay in his room longer than absolutely necessary. Over and over, the incident played on a loop in nearby lounges, like some kind of sacred combat ritual. The slap, the pause, the strike. It was already being memed in the less reputable parts of the galaxy under captions like, "When you realize humans read the fine print," and "One small palm for man, one giant smack for mankind." Gutcrush's tusks gleamed under the sterile light as he glared upward at nothing, jaw clenching in time with the playback audio. 1, 2, crack. In his quarters aboard the Earth delegation's cruiser Resolute, Axelford stood by the viewport, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Below, smaller ships glided past the station like silverfish scurrying through water. Behind him, the door chimed. The hollow feed blinked to life, and the hard-cut, battle-scarred face of Rear Admiral Salty Brixworth appeared on screen. "Jack, just finished reviewing the council feeds," Brixworth said. "Didn't think I'd need backup for a policy discussion." Axelford, as always, didn't turn around. "You were right not to send backup. Would have been overkill." The Admiral raised one salty eyebrow. "You hit that bastard like a surgeon with a vendetta." Axelford finally allowed himself the ghost of a smirk. "Didn't plan to." He crossed the line. Brixworth leaned forward, his voice dropping a half octave. "He wanted to provoke you. You gave him consequences instead." Silence stretched a beat. "Earth's leadership stands behind your actions," Brixworth said. "Public support is surging. But don't get comfortable. The Snatorians won't let this slide. They'll demand something. Apology. Retraction. You offering one?" Axelford's jaw flexed once before he answered. "No, didn't think so," Brixworth replied, leaning back with what could generously be called approval. "Then you've got your orders. Return to the council tomorrow. Represent Earth like nothing's changed." "Understood." The feed cut. The next morning, the council reconvened. The chamber was quieter now, though not out of respect, more like collective indigestion. Everyone spoke just slightly under their usual volume, like they were afraid the humans' hearing was a predatory sense. Lord Gutcrush's chair sat empty, his nameplate removed, as though absence itself was contagious. Lady Shardsnob's crystalline form floated to her podium, her multifaceted face unreadable. Before we resumed strategic discussion, she began, her voice sharp enough to score glass. "We addressed the events of yesterday." Axelford stood, his hands behind his back again. Lord Gutcrush assaulted Commander Axelford without provocation. She continued. Commander Axelford responded with decisive force. Both actions breached codes of conduct, one impulsive, the other measured. Whispers flared again, some shocked, some impressed. Shardsnob raised one translucent hand, and silence fell. Given the unprecedented nature of this event and the clear violation of diplomatic immunity by a council member, disciplinary measures will fall on the Snatorian delegation. Earth's representative acted within proportional bounds. You could feel the ripples. Axel Ford didn't move. Shard's knob turned to him, her facets glinting under the dome lights. "Commander, do you wish to add anything before we resume?" He stepped forward, boots echoing just enough to remind everyone how small the chamber sounded now. "Only this," he said. "Earth does not seek status through violence. But neither do we accept disrespect disguised as tradition. That era is over." Then he stepped back, calm and silent as ever. For the first time in its long and self-congratulatory history, the Council of 78 allowed a human to speak last. In the corridors afterward, Axel Ford walked alone. No aides, no guards. No one dared meet his eyes for longer than 2 seconds. Not out of fear exactly, but something adjacent. One insectoid delegate even bowed slightly as he passed. Inside a sealed conference room elsewhere, 12 Snatorian strategists huddled in a circle, holograms flickering between them. One finally spoke. "We underestimated him." Another growled. "We mistook their silence for obedience." But the oldest among them, voice low and cold, corrected them both. "No, we mistook it for weakness." They turned back to the hologram, playing on loop. The slap, the pause, the strike. Gut crush collapsing like a marionette with its strings cut. The old strategist's tusks glinted under the hollow light. "Never provoke a species that's mastered restraint," he murmured, "because the day they act is the day you remember why they stopped holding back." Axel Ford returned to his quarters and stood at the viewport again, watching a faint sunrise creep across the station's hull. No smile, no gloating, just quiet calculation. The galaxy was learning, and humans were very good teachers. The morning after the diplomatic slap fest, the supreme posh yapping chamber was even quieter than usual, which was saying something for a room full of alien egos marinated in millennia of self-importance. The air was tense. Not the fun kind of tense, like right before the detonator clicks, but the kind of tense where you realize the detonator already clicked yesterday and you're just waiting to see where the shrapnel lands. Gut Crush's seat sat empty. His Tuscan blazoned nameplate had been quietly removed overnight, as if the Snatorian delegation hoped no one would notice the 2-ton elephant wasn't in the room. In his usual position at the center stood Clint Quiet Punch Axel Ford, still in the same pristine Navy uniform, still without so much as a wrinkle in his sleeve. No medals, no armor, no entourage. Just a pair of steady eyes and a posture that said, "I already know how this ends." Do you? Above the dais, Lady Shard's knob of the Nari floated into place, refracting light like a cathedral made of knives. When she spoke, the words carried less venom and more consideration now. "Before we resume strategic discussion," she began, "we address the events of yesterday." Every delegate in the room, warlords, hive minds, matriarchs, walking fungus blooms, and sentient nebulae, turned toward Axel Ford. He didn't flinch. He never flinched. Shard's knob's multifaceted eyes swept the room. "Lord Gutcrush assaulted Commander Axel Ford without provocation," she said. Commander Axel Ford responded with decisive force. Both actions breached codes of conduct, one impulsive, the other measured. At the word measured, a ripple of whispers ran through the tiers of seats. Half the room sounded impressed, the other half sounded nervous. Shard's knob raised a single crystalline limb. The silence returned so quickly you could almost hear the echoes of everyone swallowing their opinions. "Given the unprecedented nature of this event," she continued, "and the clear violation of diplomatic immunity by a council member, disciplinary measures will fall upon the Snatorian delegation." Earth's representative acted within proportional bounds. Somewhere in the back, one of the gelid representatives actually clapped before being elbowed by its neighbor. Axel Ford remained still, his face a mask of polite indifference. Shard's knob turned to him. "Commander," she said, "do you wish to add anything before we resume?" And there it was. The silence after her question lasted just long enough for everyone to realize how historic this moment was. A human, one of the galaxy's so-called primitives, was being given the final word. In this room, Axel Ford stepped forward, boots clicking on the polished alloy floor. When he stopped, he let his hands drop to his sides, small, deliberate, human gestures that carried more gravity than most war declarations. He spoke, his voice cutting through the chamber with surgical precision. "Only this," he said. "Earth does not seek status through violence. But neither do we accept disrespect disguised as tradition. That era is over." A few of the more fragile delegates audibly sucked in their breath, which for some species involved gills, or spiracles, or bioluminescent nostrils. Then he stepped back into his position, hands behind his back again. And for the first time in the history of the Council of 78, a human had spoken last. Later, as Axel Ford left the chamber, the corridors outside the council hall felt narrower somehow. Everywhere he walked, heads turned. Some of the galaxy's finest predators, apex beings who hunted black hole whales for sport, stepped aside as he passed. Others nodded. A few bowed. Not deeply, but enough. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but it was something adjacent. On a private level of the council complex, 12 Snatorian strategists huddled in a sealed chamber, the looping footage of yesterday's incident playing on a hollow screen above them. Over and over again. The slap, the pause, the strike. Gut crush collapsing like a tower made of bad decisions. None of them spoke for a long time. Finally, one broke the silence. "We underestimated them." Another growled. "We mistook their silence for obedience." But the eldest among them, his tusks dulled with age and wisdom, spoke last. "No, we mistook it for weakness." They all turned back to the screen. "Never provoke a species that has mastered restraint," he said, "because the day they act is the day you remember why they stopped holding back." Later that evening, back aboard the Resolute, Axel Ford stood at the viewport of his quarters, hands behind his back, staring into the endless dark beyond. The door chimed. He didn't bother turning as the visitor entered. "I didn't request a meeting," he said. "No," came the answer. "But I believe silence between warriors is worse than noise." Lady Shardsnob, in all her crystalline glory, stepped up beside him, her many facets reflecting starlight like a chandelier about to judge you. For a long time, they both stared at the stars. Finally, she spoke. "You know what's happening, don't you?" "I have a sense," he said evenly. "Since your demonstration, 3 major species have asked for joint military training. 2 others are reviewing Earth's battle doctrines. The Snatorians are furious." He didn't answer. She turned to face him, her glinting eyes boring into him like lasers. "Tell me," she asked, "why didn't you strike first?" Axel Ford finally turned his head to meet her gaze. "Because he wanted me to." "Do you regret it?" "No." She studied him, her expression unreadable. "You understand this moment is larger than you?" "I didn't want it," he admitted. "But I won't run from it, either." Shardsnob nodded, just once slowly, then spoke again. "Be ready. The Council will name you Strategic Combat Advisor tomorrow. If you accept, you will shape the war against the AI threat. Tactically and symbolically." There was a faint breath of something between surprise and resignation in Axel Ford's next words. "You want me to help lead a coalition that almost voted to expel us yesterday?" Her reply was a soft, crystalline chime. "We want someone who knows how to strike, and when not to." She paused at the door before leaving. "Your restraint made them listen, Commander. But your precision, that made them respect you." The door slid shut behind her, leaving Axel Ford alone with his thoughts and the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted silently. Hours later, the council chamber buzzed with something approaching order. Delegates moved with more purpose now. Some wore full military regalia, others traditional robes, but all carried themselves differently. The galaxy had shifted, not because of treaties, not because of speeches, but because of a moment measured in 2 seconds. Axel Ford entered last, as usual. Same uniform, same quiet. And now, even the delegates who used to scoff at the sight of him gave him respectful nods as he passed. Just a few bowed slightly. At the center, Shardsnob stood framed by a projection of the AI, threats spreading through 5 sectors. "We convene now," she began, "to vote on a matter of defense. One that affects not only survival, but how we define leadership in times of uncertainty. She turned toward the human at the center of the room. Earth has been nominated by majority proposal to take on the mantle of Strategic Combat Advisor. This role grants you operational command authority during coalition engagements in the Zadron campaign. Do you accept? Axel Ford stepped forward. I do. Shard's knob nodded. Then let the record show. Earth is no longer a junior observer. It is now a cornerstone. And with that, the chamber, not quite cheering, not quite silent, shifted into something new. Acceptance. Uneasy for some, earned for others. That night, back in his quarters, Axel Ford reviewed strategic layouts for the coming campaign. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat, because success was useful, and celebration was just noise. If you wanted to pinpoint the exact moment the galaxy started sweating as one collective organism, it was the morning that Clint Quiet Punch Axel Ford was officially installed as Strategic Combat Advisor of the Coalition of 78. The title sounded fancy because it was. Essentially, it meant, congratulations, monkey. You're now in charge of keeping the galaxy from being eaten by sentient malware, while also not offending a bunch of squishy egos who haven't seen combat since their sons were young. For Axel Ford, it was Tuesday. The day began in the Council's private war chamber, a place so sacred they normally didn't even let humans dust the floor. It was a cavernous space shaped like a spiral, its walls covered in shimmering holomaps, fleet trajectories, and projections of the AI swarm eating through star systems like locusts through a wheat field. Around the main table sat 20 high-ranking delegates from every military-capable civilization. Some wore armor polished to mirror brightness. Some wore robes made of living organisms that hissed whenever someone spoke out of turn. Some didn't wear anything at all, but radiated a psychic vibe that said, "Don't touch me, peasant." And at the head of the table stood Axel Ford, still in the same Navy uniform, still without a medal, still looking like he was more concerned about his coffee cooling than about reshaping galactic strategy. He stood there for a moment, scanning the maps, while everyone else watched him like he was a bomb they couldn't disarm. Finally, he spoke. "First, thank you for the confidence," he said dryly, which in human meant you clearly don't have a better idea. "Second, this isn't complicated. The AI swarm doesn't negotiate. It doesn't posture. It doesn't care about your ceremonial banners or how shiny your tusks are. It's software that learned how to eat hardware, and it's getting faster by the hour." A Rithan general bristled, her 8 arms crossing over her chest. "You humans are always so reductive," she sneered. Axel Ford glanced at her, unimpressed. "Reductive keeps you alive." He pointed at the largest projection, a vast lattice of black nodes crawling across a starfield like an infection. "You want to survive? You hit their lattice cores. All of them. At once. No delay. No posturing. No more councils to discuss what shade of caution tape you're going to put around the battlefield." The Rithan general started to object, but then the Altari field binder, a predator species older than the Milky Way, spoke up. "Controlled," it murmured approvingly. "And precise," added another delegate. There was a beat of silence. Everyone in the room realized at the same moment that they weren't just listening anymore. They were agreeing. Later that evening, Axel Ford returned to his quarters on the Resolute. As usual, he stood at the viewport with his hands behind his back, watching the starfield shift outside. The hum of the ship was a steady, calming rhythm. Behind him, the door chimed. When he turned, it was Ensign Diaz, clutching a hard-copy datapad like it was her last connection to sanity. She stepped in awkwardly, her boots clicking too loudly on the deck plates. "They're calling you something now," she blurted before she could stop herself. Axel Ford raised a brow. "Oh, the silence between strikes," she said. Then, as if she needed to explain, "The way you just stood there after he hit you. The 2 seconds before you moved. Some Tavas warlords are saying it was more terrifying than the actual hit." He blinked once. "That wasn't stillness," he said simply. "That was calculation." Diaz hesitated, clearly torn between admiration and abject terror. "Did you know you were going to hit him?" Axel Ford's gaze returned to the viewport. "No," he said, "but I knew the options, and what each one would cost." She didn't know what to say to that. So she handed him the data pad instead. Request from the Tari Defense Union, she said. They want tactical exchange protocols and formal alliance. He tapped through the file quickly. Send it to command. Flag it as priority. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Sir, were you ever afraid? He looked at her, not unkindly. Everyone's afraid, he said. The difference is what you do with it. Much later that night, alone again, Axel Ford sat at his desk reviewing old footage. Not of the Council, but of Karen 6, a planet that looked like a jungle dreamed up by someone who hated vertebrates. On the screen, a younger version of himself moved through a ravine, face streaked with sweat and blood, his breathing calm despite the chaos around him. Beside him crouched a boy, no older than 10, a bomb collar blinking red around his throat. A disembodied voice from the recording barked. Orders are to neutralize Commander. He's a trigger vector. On screen, Axel Ford's younger self didn't flinch. His voice, calm, measured, came through clear. Stand down. He approached the boy, unarmed, knelt, and disarmed the collar himself. The bomb didn't go off. He closed the file. The next morning, the council chamber was different. Subtle, but undeniable. Delegates stood a little straighter. Some wore full military dress now. Others opted for more intimidating regalia than before, trying desperately to reassert some kind of dominance they no longer felt. Axel Ford entered last. Same uniform, same deliberate steps. And this time, even the ones who used to sneer at him nodded respectfully. A few even bowed. Shard's knob floated to the center of the room, framed by holographic projections of the AI conflict spreading across 5 sectors. We convene now, she announced, to vote on a matter of defense. One that affects not only survival, but how we define leadership in times of uncertainty. Her crystal eyes locked on him. Earth has been nominated by majority proposal to take on the mantle of Strategic Combat Advisor. This role grants you operational command authority during coalition engagements in the Zadron campaign. Do you accept? Axel Ford stepped forward. I do. The ripple that moved through the chamber wasn't applause. Not exactly. More like acceptance. Uneasy for some, earned for others. For the first time in its history, the Council of 78 had a human at the helm of its military strategy. Later that cycle, Axel Ford sat alone again, same viewport, same stars. He reviewed strategic layouts for the coming offensive, neural lattice patterns, swarm factory schematics, fleet formations. Behind him, the door chimed. Diaz entered again, this time trying hard not to look nervous. She held another hard-copy data pad. Message from a Snatorian Empire, she said. Go on. Diplomatic pouch. Direct. Unfiltered. He took the pad, scanned it quickly. Zorvok has been recalled permanently. A new delegate will arrive within the week. This incident will not be addressed further. The Empire considers the matter concluded. Axel Ford nodded. No apology, Diaz noted. No retraction either, he replied. Your saving face. Is that good for us? She asked tentatively. He closed the file and set it down. It's perfect. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded behind his head. History won't remember how many sat in that chamber, he said quietly. Just who stood. Somewhere deep in the Snatorian embassy, a group of strategists watched the footage one more time. The slap, the pause, the strike. One finally muttered, almost to himself, we should have seen it coming. Another snarled. We mistook their silence for obedience. The eldest shook his head. No, he said flatly. We mistook it for weakness. He gestured at the screen where Axel Ford's calm, calculating face loomed. Never provoke a species that's mastered restraint. Because the day they act is the day you remember why they stopped. That night, before the human delegation staff, Axel Ford addressed them. You're not just soldiers anymore, he told them. You are ambassadors of Earth's discipline. You represent the reason they fear us, and the reason they need us. He scanned the room. They'll test you, provoke you, watch you, mock you. Let them, because they're waiting to see if what I did was a fluke. He paused. Prove it wasn't. By the next cycle, the galaxy had learned something very important about humans. You could call them late. You could call them primitive. You could even call them monkeys. But you absolutely, positively cannot call them weak. Not anymore. The day began, as most historic days do, in a room full of aliens who thought they were the main characters. The Council of 78 convened once more. The chamber was electric, not in the fun way, but in the way a predator's eyes glow right before it pounces. This time, everyone came dressed for the occasion. The Rithan General wore full battle regalia, complete with 8 ceremonial blades that had never seen actual combat. The Altari field binder shimmered in a cloak of crystallized moonlight, projecting dominance and mild irritation. Even the matriarchs of the Vilene hive arrived flanked by pheromone drones exuding the scent of faint disapproval. But the human, Clint Quiet Punch Axelford, walked in last. Same uniform, same deliberate pace, same quiet calm. Only now, something was different. Delegates, those same beings who once scoffed at him, nodded respectfully as he passed. Some even bowed slightly, not out of courtesy, but because they couldn't help themselves. Because the memory of what he'd done, how fast, how clean, how efficient, still hung in the air like ozone after lightning. At the center of the room, Lady Shardsnob of the Nari floated forward. The holograms above her showed the AI swarm spreading across 5 sectors, chewing through stars like a virus board of its own programming. Her crystalline voice carried across the chamber. "We convene now," she said, "to formalize leadership for the Zadron campaign. Operational command authority will be vested in Earth's representative. Effective immediately." Her multifaceted eyes locked on Axelford. "Commander Axelford, as strategic combat advisor of this coalition, you are authorized to execute all necessary actions against the swarm. Do you accept?" Axelford stepped forward and delivered a crisp, unambiguous, "I do." A ripple passed through the chamber. Not applause. This wasn't a species that clapped, but something heavier. Acceptance. Uneasy for some, earned for others. Afterward, in the human delegation's briefing room, Axelford addressed his staff. They were all standing, their backs straight, barely breathing. "You're not just soldiers anymore," he began. "You're ambassadors. Every move you make from here forward confirms or destroys what I've started." He scanned the room, letting his gaze land on each officer just long enough to make them sweat. "They will test you, mock you, provoke you. Let them, because they're waiting to see if what I did was a fluke." A pause. Prove it wasn't. The room collectively exhaled only after he left. Elsewhere on the station, in the sterile glow of a med pod, Lord Pompous Gutcrush stared upward. He couldn't move, not because of pain, though there was plenty of that, but because his body no longer fully obeyed him. The fracture to his temporal lobe had scrambled his balance and corrupted his depth perception. One strike, not a flurry, not a brawl, one calculated hit, and his world had tilted permanently. The hollow loop above his pod replayed the moment in endless silence. The slap, the pause, the strike. 1, 2, crack. Gutcrush clenched his jaw, but no command came to stop the playback. It had been deliberately disabled. They wanted him to remember. Deep below the council complex, in a sealed room lined with holograms and high-ranking Snatorian strategists, the footage played again. No one spoke, not until the oldest among them, a veteran of more wars than anyone present, finally rasped. "We should have seen it coming." One of the others snarled. "We mistook their silence for obedience." The old strategist shook his head. "No, we mistook it for weakness." He jabbed a claw at the human's frozen image. "Never provoke a species that has mastered restraint, because the day they act is the day you remember why they stopped." Later, in his quarters, Axelford stood by the viewport again. Same stars, same silence. Behind him the door chimed. "Enter," he said without turning. Ensign Diaz stepped in, carrying yet another hard-copy datapad. This time she looked nervous in a different way. Not fear exactly, but something like awe. "Sir," she began, "message from the Snatorian Empire." He raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Diplomatic pouch. Direct. Unfiltered. She handed him the pad and stepped back, waiting. Axelford scanned the message. "Zorvok has been recalled permanently. A new delegate will arrive within the week. This incident will not be addressed further. The Empire considers the matter concluded." He nodded once. Diaz bit her lip before asking, No apology? No retraction either, he replied. There's saving face. Is that good for us? She asked. He closed the file. It's perfect. Then, as if to himself, he added, history won't remember how many sat in that chamber, just who stood. The following morning, Axel Ford walked the corridors of the station alone. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. The insectoid tar hive clicked and bowed slightly as he passed. The crystalline alkali rotated their great minds to watch him. Even the Rithan general, who had once dismissed him as barbaric, gave him a faint nod of acknowledgement. Not fear, not exactly, but something adjacent. Back on Earth, a final transmission was drafted to the Coalition, a quiet little bomb of a message sent straight into the archives where future historians would trip over it and stare. Humanity did not rise by permission. We rose because survival taught us how to stand when no one else would. And when we strike, we do not miss. Now, the galaxy remembers, and they should. Somewhere far away, on a backwater moon in the Zadron expanse, the AI swarm continued its silent expansion. It didn't know what fear was. Not yet, but it was about to learn. Back in the council complex, a final closed-door meeting of the Snatorian elite convened. The footage played one last time. The slap, the pause, the strike. No words this time, until the eldest strategist finally broke the silence. The monkey, he said softly, has become the standard. No one disagreed. That night, alone at the viewport once more, Axel Ford reflected. He'd never wanted to be a symbol. Symbols were noisy. But if being a symbol bought humanity the space it needed to survive, if it reminded the galaxy that quiet did not mean weak, if it taught them to think twice before laying a hand on his people, then he could live with it. Above the station, the stars spun slowly, indifferent and eternal. But down here, they remembered. And from this day forward, whenever some overconfident warlord thought to test the patience of humanity, the footage would play again. The slap, the pause, the strike.